Some bridges remember what the town decided to forget. The honeymoon-covered bridge spans the Ellis River in Jackson, New Hampshire, a small village tucked into the eastern slopes of the White Mountains. Built in 1876, the bridge stretches just over 40 feet across waters that run clear in summer and turn black with snowmelt each spring. The structure earned its romantic name from a Victorian-era tradition. Newlywed couples would stop their carriages at the bridge's center, steal a kiss in the shadows, and continue on toward the grand hotels that once dotted the valley. Jackson has always been a place of postcard beauty. The covered bridge sits along Route 16, visible from the road but separated by a small parking area and a walking path that discourages casual traffic. Most visitors come for photographs. They pose at the entrance, capture the weathered red paint against autumn foliage, and leave within minutes. But the bridge has another history, one that locals discuss only when asked directly, and sometimes not even then. The Ellis River is deceptively shallow for most of the year, barely reaching a grown man's knees in late summer. Yet between 1890 and 1920, 7 drownings were recorded within a quarter-mile of the bridge. Most were attributed to spring flooding, or the slippery rocks that line the riverbed. One, however, stands apart in the town records. On April 14, 1902, a 26-year-old schoolteacher named Harriet Winslow walked onto the Honeymoon Bridge during a late afternoon rainstorm. She never reached the other side. Search parties found her body 2 days later, lodged against a fallen birch tree 100 yards downstream. The coroner ruled the death accidental, a slip perhaps, or a misstep in the heavy rain. Her 11 students attended the funeral. The school closed for a week. By May, the incident had faded from public conversation. But something else began shortly after. The first documented account came from a traveling minister named Reverend Thomas Hartley, who passed through Jackson in the autumn of 1903. In a letter to his wife, preserved in the New Hampshire Historical Society archives, he wrote of crossing the covered bridge alone at dusk. "I heard what I took to be a child nearby," Hartley wrote, reciting numbers in descending order, 12, 11, 10. I stopped and listened. The voice was clear but distant, as though coming from beneath the bridge itself. It continued to 9, then 8, then 7. I waited, it reached 3, and then it stopped. I called out, thinking perhaps a local child was playing nearby, but no one answered. Hartley noted that he searched the riverbank for several minutes before continuing on. He did not mention the incident again in his correspondence. Over the following decades, similar reports surfaced, always sparse, always from individuals crossing alone. A honeymooning bride in 1921 mentioned it in a diary entry. A forestry worker in 1947 told a co-worker who later recounted the story to a local newspaper. A photographer in 1963 submitted a letter to Yankee magazine describing the experience in precise detail. Each account shared the same elements: a child's voice, counting backward from 12, stopping at 3. Eleanor Whitfield, a retired librarian who lived in Jackson for over 40 years, spoke about the phenomenon in a 1992 interview with a regional history project. "I crossed that bridge hundreds of times," she said, "but only twice alone at dusk. Both times I heard it. It's not frightening exactly. It's more like, well, like someone trying to finish something they never could. The voice is calm, almost careful, and when it stops at 3, there's this silence that feels heavier than it should." When asked why she believed the counting never reached 2, Whitfield paused for several seconds. "I don't know," she finally said. "Maybe it's not allowed to." Marcus DeLuca, a sound engineer from Boston, visited the bridge in 2004 as part of an independent documentary project on New England folklore. He set up recording equipment inside the bridge on 3 consecutive evenings, each session lasting from 5 in the afternoon until midnight. On the second night, at 6:47 p.m., his audio captured a faint anomaly, a rhythmic pattern that, when isolated and amplified, resembled a child's voice. The sequence lasted approximately 18 seconds. DeLuca noted that the frequency was consistent with human vocal patterns, but could not identify a definitive source. "It's not wind," he said in a later interview. "Wind doesn't count backward." DeLuca submitted his findings to 2 acoustic research labs. One declined to comment. The other returned a brief analysis stating that the sound was likely environmental in origin, but could not rule out human presence. After Harriet Winslow's death in 1902, local school records confirm that her class consisted of 11 students, 6 boys and 5 girls, ranging in age from 7 to 12. All 11 were accounted for in subsequent census records. All 11 lived to adulthood. But a handwritten note in the margins of the school's attendance ledger, dated April 10, 1902, 4 days before Winslow's death, mentions a 12th name, E. Marsh, enrolled, not attending. No student by that name appears in any other town record. No family named Marsh is listed in Jackson's tax rolls, property deeds, or church registries from that era. A search of regional archives in 2011 turned up a single reference, a brief notation in a county medical log from March 1902 describing a child treated for fever at a farmhouse near the Ellis River crossing. The child's age was listed as 8. The name was partially illegible, but appeared to begin with the letter E. No follow-up record exists. In 1978, the New Hampshire Department of Transportation conducted a routine structural inspection of the Honeymoon Bridge. The report, 12 pages long, details the condition of the roof, supports, and flooring. On the final page, a handwritten addendum reads, "Acoustic anomaly, reported by inspector during solo walkthrough, 6:15 p.m., no source identified." The note is initialed, but not signed. It does not appear in the official digital archive. A request filed under the state's Right to Know law in 2016 sought any additional documentation related to the bridge's inspection history. The response included all standard reports, but noted that certain field notes from the 1978 survey are no longer available. Local guides in Jackson have long advised visitors to cross the bridge in pairs. The reason given is practical. The wooden planks are uneven, and the lighting inside is poor. But several longtime residents have offered a different explanation when pressed. "It's quieter that way," said one, a hardware store owner who declined to be named. "When you're alone, the bridge talks back." Today, the Honeymoon-covered bridge remains one of the most photographed landmarks in Carroll County. It appears on calendars, postcards, and tourism brochures. Families stop for pictures. Couples still pause at the center, continuing the old tradition. But those who cross alone, particularly at dusk, occasionally report the same experience that Reverend Hartley described over a century ago. A child's voice, calm and careful, counting backward from 12. It always stops at 3. No one has ever explained why the count begins at 12 when Harriet Winslow's class had only 11 students. No one has identified the 12th child, and no one has ever heard the voice reach 2. Some numbers, it seems, are not meant to be finished, and some bridges hold on to the lessons that were never completed. Some things return whether you believe in them or not. The Bath-Swiftwater-covered bridge crosses the wild Ammonoosuc River in Grafton County, New Hampshire, connecting the towns of Bath and Swiftwater along a quiet stretch of Route 10. Built in 1849, the bridge is one of the oldest surviving covered structures in the state, spanning just over 150 feet of dark, slow-moving water. The timbers are hand-hewn, the lattice trusses original, and the interior smells of pine resin and river damp, even in the driest months of summer. Swiftwater itself is not a town in any official sense, merely a cluster of homes, a small church, and a shuttered general store that closed in 1986. The population has never exceeded 200, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and certain things are simply not discussed with outsiders. The wild Ammonoosuc is fed by snowmelt from the western White Mountains. In March, the river swells to dangerous levels, carrying ice chunks and debris that batter the bridge's stone abutments. Locals know to avoid the crossing during peak runoff, particularly at night, when the sound of the water drowns out everything else. It was during one such march in 1951 that a dairy farmer named Roland Thibodeau first reported the footprints. Roland Thibodeau owned 43 acres on the Bath side of the river. His morning routine required him to cross the covered bridge before dawn to reach his hay barn on the opposite bank. On March 17, 1951, he entered the bridge at approximately 4:15 in the morning, lantern in hand, and stopped after only a few steps. A trail of wet footprints led from the Bath entrance toward the center of the bridge. They glistened in the lantern light, fresh enough that small pools had gathered in the grain of the wood. Thibodeau followed them cautiously, counting as he went. 14 steps in total. The trail ended abruptly near the bridge's midpoint, as though whoever made them had simply ceased to exist. Thibodeau searched both riverbanks. He found no one. No vehicle had passed. No tracks led away from either entrance. He mentioned the incident to his wife that evening, but did not report it to authorities. There was, after all, nothing to report. Wet footprints were not a crime. But the following year, on March 17, 1952, Thibodeau crossed the bridge at the same hour and found the same trail, same number of steps, same abrupt ending, same drag mark on what would have been the left heel. He told a neighbor, who dismissed it as runoff seeping through the roof. But Thibodeau had examined the ceiling. It was dry. Word spread slowly through the community over the following decade. A postal carrier named Doris Farnsworth reported seeing the footprints in 1958. A state road crew supervisor named Gerald Ouellette documented them in a maintenance log in 1963. Each account described the same details: wet footprints, size 9, bare, left heel dragging, appearing sometime around 4 in the morning on March 17th, and always stopping at the center of the bridge. In 1974, a University of New Hampshire folklore student named Patricia Holbrook conducted interviews with 6 Swiftwater residents as part of her graduate thesis on regional anomalies. Her transcripts, archived in the university's Damon Library, contain the most detailed eyewitness accounts on record. Walter Briggs, a retired mill worker who was 73 at the time of the interview, told Holbrook that he had seen the footprints on 4 separate occasions. "You can smell the river on them," Briggs said, "not like rain, like the deep part of the water where the cold sits. They're always the same, always heading toward the middle, and they always stop at the same board. I counted once, 14 steps from the Bath side." When Holbrook asked Briggs if he had any explanation, he shook his head. "Some folks say it's Ethan Crowell," he said, "but I don't like to talk about that." Holbrook pressed for details. Briggs declined to elaborate. The name Ethan Crowell appears in only one official record, a death certificate filed with Grafton County on March 18, 1893. Crowell was 29 years old. Cause of death, drowning. Location, Wild Ammonoosuc River, near the Swiftwater Crossing. The certificate notes that the body was recovered approximately 200 yards downstream from the covered bridge. No other documentation exists. No obituary, no burial record, no mention in local newspapers. A search of census records shows an Ethan Crowell living in Bath in 1890, listed as a laborer, unmarried, boarding with a family named Prescott. The 1893 census, taken 6 months after his death, does not list him, nor does it mention his passing. It is as though he simply disappeared from the record. In 1978, the New Hampshire Department of Transportation replaced the floorboards of the Bath-Swiftwater covered bridge as part of a preservation initiative. The original pine planks, warped and worn after more than a century of use, were removed and disposed of. New pressure-treated lumber was installed. On March 17, 1979, a maintenance worker named Dennis Lavoie arrived at the bridge at 5:30 in the morning to inspect the new flooring. He found a trail of wet footprints leading from the bath entrance to the center of the bridge. Lavoie photographed the prints with a Polaroid camera. The images, which he kept in a personal file until his death in 2003, show 14 distinct impressions, consistent with a barefoot adult male, left heel dragging slightly. The floorboards were replaced again in 1991 and 2004. Both times, the prints returned the following March. In 2009, a civil engineer named Sandra Nakamura conducted an independent analysis of the bridge's drainage and structural integrity at the request of a regional historical society. Her report, 47 pages long, addressed concerns about water damage and load-bearing capacity. In a brief appendix, she noted an unexplained moisture pattern observed during a pre-dawn site visit on March 17th. The pattern was localized to a linear path along the eastern floorboards, Nakamura wrote. No overhead leakage was detected. Humidity levels inside the structure were consistent with external conditions. The source of the moisture remains undetermined. Nakamura did not mention footprints in her official report, but in an email to a colleague 2 weeks later, obtained through a Freedom of Information request in 2015, she wrote, "I don't know what I saw, but it looked like someone had walked in from the river and stopped in the middle of the bridge. The prints were perfect, too perfect." She did not respond to follow-up inquiries. Town records from 1893 contain a single reference to the night of Ethan Crowell's death. A constable's log, water-damaged and partially illegible, notes that a disturbance was reported near the covered bridge at approximately 4 in the morning on March 17th. The nature of the disturbance is not specified. No arrest was made. No investigation followed. A local historian named Franklin Dupuis, who spent 3 decades researching Grafton County's early settlements, speculated in a 1997 article that Crowell may have been involved in a labor dispute with a logging company operating in the area. Dupuis cited anecdotal evidence, stories passed down through families, that Crowell had been threatened in the weeks before his death, but no documentation supports this theory, and the logging company's records, if they ever existed, have never been found. Today, the Bath Swiftwater-covered bridge remains open to pedestrian and limited vehicle traffic. It is listed on the National Register of Historic Places and draws modest tourist interest, particularly during fall foliage season. A small placard at the Bath entrance describes the bridge's construction and historical significance. It does not mention Ethan Crowell. It does not mention the footprints. But every March 17th, a small number of locals rise before dawn and drive to the bridge. They do not enter. They simply watch from the parking area, waiting for the first light to reach the interior. Some say they have seen the footprints glisten in the shadows. Others say they have heard something, a single splash, faint and distant, as though someone had just stepped into the river. No one has ever followed the prints to see where they might lead. And no one has ever explained why they stop at the 14th step exactly halfway across, as though the man who made them finally reached the place he had been trying to go, or the place he was never allowed to leave. Some images capture what was never there to begin with. The Ashuelot-covered bridge spans the Ashuelot River in Winchester, New Hampshire, a mill town of approximately 4,000 residents near the Massachusetts border. Constructed in 1864, the bridge stretches 169 feet across slow-moving water that once powered the textile factories lining the riverbank. The factories are gone now, replaced by empty lots and a single historical marker that few visitors stop to read. The bridge itself is a town lattice truss design, painted the traditional New England red, with a pedestrian walkway added in 1972 after vehicle traffic was permanently rerouted. It is one of the longest surviving covered bridges in New Hampshire and appears in most regional guidebooks, though it attracts only modest attention compared to its more famous counterparts in the White Mountains. Winchester has always been a quiet place, the kind of town where generations stay, where family names repeat in cemetery records, and where certain stories circulate for decades before anyone thinks to write them down. The photograph was taken on October 9, 1994. A woman named Carolyn Dietrich, 43 years old, visiting from Burlington, Vermont, stopped at the Ashuelot-covered bridge during a weekend leaf-peeping trip with her husband. She had purchased a disposable camera, a Kodak FunSaver 27 exposures, at a gas station that morning. The bridge was her 11th photograph of the day. She did not notice anything unusual when she pressed the shutter. The bridge was empty. Her husband waited in the car. The afternoon sun fell at a low autumn angle, casting long shadows through the bridge's latticed walls. 2 weeks later, Carolyn picked up her developed prints from a 1-hour photo lab in Burlington. Most were unremarkable. Foliage shots, a covered bridge in Vermont, her husband standing beside their car. But photograph 11 stopped her. In the center of the Ashuelot Bridge, clearly visible in the afternoon light, stood a man. He wore dark clothing, a coat that fell below the knee, trousers that appeared loose and high-waisted. His face was turned slightly away from the camera, obscured by shadow. In his right hand, he held what appeared to be a book or ledger, pressed against his chest. His posture was rigid, formal, as though he were waiting for something or someone. Carolyn was certain the bridge had been empty. She had walked halfway across before taking the photograph. She had seen no one. She showed the print to her husband, who suggested it might be a double exposure or a processing error. But the figure was sharp, detailed, and positioned naturally within the frame. It did not look like a mistake. In December of that year, Carolyn contacted the New Hampshire Division of Historical Resources and mailed them the print, along with a brief letter describing the circumstances. She received no response. But the photograph did not disappear. In 2001, a graduate student named Marcus Fairbanks discovered Carolyn's letter and photograph while researching covered bridge folklore for a thesis at Keene State College. The materials had been filed in a miscellaneous folder, uncatalogued, in a storage room at the State Archives in Concord. Fairbanks was intrigued. He requested permission to examine the original negative, which Carolyn had included with her submission. The archivist granted access, but noted that the negative had never been formally processed or reviewed. Fairbanks brought the negative to a photography professor at the college, a woman named Dr. Ingrid Solberg, who specialized in analog imaging and archival restoration. She examined it under magnification and confirmed that the figure was present on the original negative, not a print artifact or a processing anomaly. But she noticed something else. The man's shadow fell toward the camera, toward the south. Based on the angle of light entering the bridge and the timestamp on the negative, the sun would have been positioned to the southwest at approximately 3:45 in the afternoon. Every other shadow in the frame fell to the northeast, consistent with that light source. The man's shadow did not. Dr. Solberg documented her findings in a 3-page memo which Fairbanks included in his thesis appendix. She concluded that the discrepancy was inconsistent with natural light behavior and could not be explained by lens distortion, camera angle, or film defect. "Shadows do not lie," she wrote, "but this one does." Fairbanks contacted 2 additional archivists to review the negative independently. The first, a retired Kodak technician named Wallace Pruitt, examined the film stock and confirmed it was authentic 1994 manufacturing. The second, a forensic imaging specialist named Dr. Raymond Okonkwo at Boston University analyzed the grain structure and exposure levels. Both noted the shadow anomaly without prompting. Neither could explain it. The man's clothing presented another problem. Fairbanks consulted a costume historian at the University of New Hampshire who reviewed a high-resolution scan of the print. She identified the coat as consistent with civilian dress from the 1860s, possibly a frock coat, commonly worn during the Civil War period. The ledger, she noted, resembled account books used by military quartermasters or census officials. But the Ashuelot-covered bridge was not completed until 1864. The Civil War ended in 1865. If the man in the photograph was dressed in period-accurate clothing, he would have had only a narrow window, perhaps a single year, during which both he and the bridge existed in the same moment. And yet no historical record describes such a figure. No quartermaster was stationed in Winchester. No census official was assigned to the region during that period. The town's wartime records, incomplete as they are, contain no reference to a man matching the description. In 2003, Fairbanks attempted to locate Carolyn Dietrich to conduct a formal interview. He found a forwarding address in Montpelier, Vermont, and sent a letter. A reply came 3 weeks later, not from Carolyn, but from her daughter. Carolyn had died in 2001, the same year Fairbanks discovered the photograph. Her daughter, whose name was not included in the correspondence, wrote that her mother had spoken of the image several times in her final years. She said she dreamed about it, the daughter wrote. Always the same dream. She's standing in the bridge, and the man is there, and he turns toward her. But she wakes up before she sees his face. She told me once that she thought he was waiting for someone to take his picture, like he'd been waiting for a long time. The letter ended with a request that the photograph not be published or reproduced. Fairbanks honored the request. His thesis was completed in 2004, but never submitted for publication. The original negative was returned to the state archives, where it remains in the same uncatalogued folder. A second photograph has never been taken. But in 2011, a local historian named Priscilla Harmon conducted a survey of Civil War-era graves in Winchester's Evergreen Cemetery. Among the weathered headstones, she found one that had partially sunk into the earth, its inscription nearly illegible. She photographed it and enhanced the image digitally. The name read, E. Aldrich, died 1865. Beneath it, a single line, he kept the count. There is no record of an E. Aldrich in Winchester's birth, death, or census records, no military file, no pension application, no mention in any town ledger. But the grave is there, the stone is real, and the inscription, whatever it means, has never been explained. Today, the Ashuelot-covered bridge is open to foot traffic year-round. Visitors walk its length, photograph the lattice walls, and leave without incident. The light still falls through the wooden slats in the late afternoon, casting long shadows that behave exactly as they should, almost always. A few have reported something different, a flicker at the edge of the frame, a shape in the background that wasn't there when they pressed the shutter. One woman, in 2017, posted an image to a regional history forum with a simple question, "Does anyone else see the man in my photo?" The post was removed within 48 hours. The woman's account was deleted shortly after. No one has explained why. And no one has ever answered the question that Carolyn Dietrich carried with her until the end. If the man in the photograph was waiting to be seen, what happens now that someone finally saw him? Some places know things before anyone should. The Kenaston-covered bridge crosses the Blackwater River in Andover, New Hampshire, a rural town of approximately 2,000 residents in Merrimack County. Built in 1882, the bridge is modest by New England standards, just over 60 feet long, a single lane wide, with a peaked roof and weathered gray siding that has never been painted. It carries light traffic along a back road connecting Andover to the village of West Andover, though most drivers take the newer concrete span a quarter-mile south. The Blackwater River is shallow here, rarely more than waist-deep even after heavy rain. The banks are lined with birch and hemlock, and in autumn, the water runs copper with fallen leaves. It is a peaceful place, unremarkable in every way except one. The names began appearing in 1953. The first was discovered by a road crew foreman named Arthur Pelletier on the morning of September 14th. He had stopped at the bridge to inspect a reported pothole and noticed fresh markings on one of the interior crossbeams, letters carved into the wood, roughly 4 inches tall, spelling a name, H. Greenlaw. Pelletier assumed it was vandalism. Teenagers carved names into covered bridges all the time, but something about the lettering unsettled him. The cuts were too clean, too uniform. No splinters, no rough edges, as though the wood had simply parted to form the letters. He reported the carving to the town clerk and thought nothing more of it. 6 days later, a man named Howard Greenlaw died of a heart attack at his home in Potter Place, a hamlet 4 miles east of the bridge. He was 58 years old. He had no connection to Andover and had never, according to his widow, visited the Kenaston Bridge. The coincidence was noted in the town clerk's log, but not investigated. Over the following decades, similar incidents occurred at irregular intervals, sometimes years apart, sometimes only months. A name would appear on a beam or rafter inside the bridge, carved in the same clean, uniform script. Within days, someone bearing that name would die somewhere in Merrimack County or the surrounding region. Not always the same cause, not always the same age, but always the same pattern, the name first, the death after. In 1971, the name Monsieur Bouchard appeared on the Western Truss. 4 days later, a woman named Marguerite Bouchard was killed in a car accident on Route 4 near Boscawen. She was 32 years old, a mother of 3, returning home from a night shift at a textile mill. The investigating officer noted the carving in his report, but classified it as unrelated to the accident. In 1984, T. Halverson was found carved into the underside of the roof joist. A week later, a retired carpenter named Theodore Halverson drowned while fishing alone on Pleasant Lake. His boat was found overturned. His body was recovered the following morning. In 1997, J. Armitage appeared on the northernmost support beam. 3 days later, a high school junior named Jennifer Armitage collapsed during track practice in Franklin and was pronounced dead at the hospital. The cause was a previously undiagnosed heart defect. By 2005, at least 14 names had been documented, each followed by a death within 7 days. Local police had begun keeping an informal record, though no official investigation was ever opened. The carvings were classified as vandalism, and the deaths, however coincidental, were attributed to natural or accidental causes. But in 2008, a detective named Samuel Ferreira requested access to the accumulated reports. Ferreira had recently transferred to the Merrimack County Sheriff's Office from Manchester and had heard rumors about the bridge from a retired deputy. He spent 3 weeks reviewing the files. His findings were never made public, but a draft memo recovered from his personal effects after his retirement in 2019 provides a summary. The carvings do not match any known tool pattern, Ferreira wrote. I consulted with a forensic woodworking specialist at UNH who examined samples from 3 separate beams. In each case, the cuts showed no lateral scoring, no compression marks, and no trace evidence consistent with a blade, chisel, or rotary tool. The specialist stated that the only comparable marks he had seen were those produced by controlled laser etching, a technology that did not exist in 1953. Ferreira also noted that the wood grain around each carving appeared undisturbed, as though the letters had always been there. I cannot explain how these names are being produced, he concluded. I can only confirm that they are, and that the pattern of correspondence with subsequent deaths is statistically improbable. He recommended continued monitoring but did not suggest public disclosure. In 2011, the name R. Este appeared on a beam near the bridge's center. Within hours, a local man recognized it. His neighbor, a 71-year-old widow named Ruth Este, had been hospitalized the previous day with pneumonia. He contacted the sheriff's office in a panic. Ruth Este died 5 days later. After that, the police stopped documenting the carvings. No official explanation was given. A request for records submitted in 2016 under New Hampshire's right-to-know law was denied on the grounds that no such records existed. But the names have continued to appear. In 2014, a photographer named Daniel Kowalski visited the bridge as part of a project on New Hampshire's historic covered structures. He spent 2 hours inside the bridge, photographing the beams and rafters in detail. When he reviewed his images that evening, he noticed a name he had not seen during his visit: L. Morse, carved faintly into a shadowed joist near the eastern entrance. Kowalski posted the image to a regional history forum asking if anyone recognized the name. Within 48 hours, a user replied, "Leonard Morse, a retired school teacher from Salisbury, had died 2 days earlier. The cause was a stroke." Kowalski returned to the bridge the following week. The carving was still there, but it had darkened, the letters now slightly deeper, as though settling into the wood. He did not photograph it again. Local residents have learned not to speak of the bridge openly. When asked, most deflect or change the subject. A hardware store owner in Andover, who declined to give his name, offered only this: "People around here know not to go looking for their own names. That's the rule. You don't go looking." No one has ever reported seeing a name before the corresponding death. The carvings always appear after the fact, or so it seems. But in 2018, a woman named Elaine Prescott told a journalist from a regional magazine that she had visited the bridge on a whim and seen her father's name carved into a beam. Her father, Gerald Prescott, was 84 years old and in good health. He died 9 days later of a fall at his home. Elaine Prescott refused further interviews. The journalist's article was never published. The magazine folded the following year. Today, the Kenaston Covered Bridge remains open to traffic, though few use it. The town has not allocated funds for restoration, and the structure shows signs of age: sagging beams, loose boards, a roof that leaks in heavy rain. Some have suggested it should be closed. Others argue it should be preserved. No one has proposed tearing it down. The beams inside are crowded now, covered with decades of names. Some are faded, barely legible. Others are fresh, the wood still pale where the letters have formed. Visitors who know the stories avoid looking too closely. But sometimes someone new stops at the bridge, walks inside, and runs a hand along the old wood. They don't know what they're looking for. They don't know what they might find. And somewhere in the grain, a name waits, already carved, already certain. The only question is whether it belongs to someone who hasn't died yet, or someone who doesn't know they're going to. Some sounds were never meant to be heard at normal speed. The Sillyville Bog Bridge stands at the edge of a wetland in Andover, New Hampshire, spanning a narrow channel where the Bog Brook drains into a wooded marsh. Built in 1873, the bridge is small, barely 40 feet long, and sits low to the water, its foundation resting on granite blocks sunk into the soft, peaty earth. The creek beneath it is rarely more than a foot deep, slow-moving, choked with cattails and decaying leaves. It is not the kind of water that makes noise. Andover is a quiet town, home to fewer than 2,500 residents spread across rolling farmland and dense hardwood forest. The Sillyville Bog Bridge is not a tourist destination. It appears on no postcards, draws no photographers, and serves only a handful of local drivers who use the back road as a shortcut to the village of East Andover. Most people in the area have never given it a second thought, until 2003. In the spring of that year, the New Hampshire Department of Transportation contracted a structural engineering firm based in Concord to assess several historic covered bridges in Merrimack County. The Killyville Bog Bridge was included in the survey due to concerns about its foundation, specifically whether the granite supports had shifted in the waterlogged soil. A team of 3 engineers arrived on April 7th. Their names were Peter Lindqvist, Maureen Saldana, and Victor Osei. They spent the morning measuring load-bearing tolerances, photographing the understructure, and collecting soil samples from the creek bed. Standard procedure. But shortly after noon, Lindqvist noticed something unusual. He had descended beneath the bridge to inspect the support beams when he became aware of a low vibration, not quite audible, but present, a pressure in the chest more than a sound in the ears. He assumed it was traffic on a distant road or perhaps construction equipment operating somewhere in the valley. He mentioned it to Saldana, who had remained on the bridge deck above. She heard nothing. Lindqvist returned to his inspection but found it difficult to concentrate. The vibration persisted, steady and rhythmic, like a pulse. After 20 minutes, he climbed back up and suggested they take a break. That evening, Lindqvist reviewed the audio recordings captured by the team's equipment, a standard practice for documenting ambient conditions during structural assessments. The recordings were unremarkable except for one, a 47-minute file captured by a microphone placed beneath the bridge near the waterline. When Lindqvist played it back, he heard the hum. It was low, approximately 18 hertz, just below the threshold of normal human hearing, but it was there, continuous, undulating slightly in pitch. He ran the file through a spectral analysis program and confirmed the frequency. He also noticed something else. The waveform was not random. It had structure, peaks and valleys that repeated at irregular but consistent intervals. It looked, he later wrote in his personal notes, like someone speaking very, very slowly. Lindqvist brought the recording to a colleague at the University of New Hampshire's Acoustics Laboratory, a professor named Dr. Helen Vargas. She agreed to analyze the file as a favor, expecting to find nothing more than environmental noise, wind interference perhaps, or the resonance of the wooden structure itself. What she found was more complicated. Dr. Vargas isolated the low-frequency component and time compressed it by a factor of 60. At normal speed, the 47-minute recording became a 47-second clip. The result was unmistakable. A voice, or something that resembled a voice, speaking in a slow, deliberate cadence. The words, if they were words, were not in any recognizable language, but the patterns were consistent with human speech, rising and falling intonation, pauses that suggested phrasing, emphasis on certain syllables. Dr. Vargas ran the compressed audio through a phonetic analysis program. The software identified several clusters that approximated English vowel sounds, but it could not match them to any known words. She described the result in a memo dated May 12, 2003. The frequency signature is consistent with a male human voice, likely adult, speaking at an extremely reduced rate, she wrote. If the original sound were produced at normal speed, it would have lasted approximately 47 seconds. Instead, it appears to have been stretched across 47 minutes. I have no explanation for how this is possible. She recommended further investigation, but noted that she could not justify additional university resources without more evidence. Lindqvist returned to the Killyville Bog Bridge twice more that spring, each time with recording equipment. On both occasions, the hum was present. On both occasions, time compression revealed the same voice-like patterns. The content, however, was never identical. Each recording produced different phonetic clusters, as though the voice were continuing a monologue that had begun long before anyone started listening. In June of 2003, Lindqvist submitted a supplemental report to the Department of Transportation, noting the acoustic anomaly and recommending that the bridge be monitored for potential structural instability caused by subsurface vibration. The report was filed, but not acted upon. A department spokesperson later stated that the findings were outside the scope of the original assessment. Lindqvist left the engineering firm in 2005 and moved to Oregon. He did not speak publicly about the recordings until 2014, when he was interviewed by a podcast focusing on unexplained phenomena. By then, he had retired. "I've thought about it a lot," he said during the interview. "The simplest explanation is that we picked up some kind of geological vibration, maybe a fault line, maybe underground water movement. But that doesn't explain the voice. That doesn't explain why it sounds like someone talking." He paused before continuing. "The thing that bothers me most is the pacing. If someone were speaking at that rate, one syllable every 30 or 40 seconds, they'd have to sustain it for hours, days maybe. Who does that? Why would anyone do that?" He had no answer. Dr. Vargas declined to be interviewed for the podcast. A request for her original analysis was denied. She stated that the files had been archived and were no longer accessible. But the recordings were not the only evidence. In 2009, a local resident named Constance Whitmore reported hearing what she described as a man humming while walking near the bridge at dusk. She had lived in Andover for over 30 years and had never noticed anything unusual about the location. But that evening, she said, the sound was unmistakable, a low, sustained tone, almost like a chant coming from beneath the bridge. She stopped and listened for several minutes. The sound did not stop. "It wasn't scary exactly," she told a reporter for a regional newspaper. "It was more like someone was trying to say something important, but they had all the time in the world to say it, like they weren't in any hurry." She did not return to the bridge after dark. In 2016, a hydrologist named Dr. Samuel Oduya conducted a survey of Bogbrook as part of a wetland preservation study. His report, filed with the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, noted several unusual features of the creek bed near the bridge, including an area of approximately 15 square feet, where the soil composition differed markedly from the surrounding peat. The anomalous zone contained a high concentration of calciumite, carbite, calcium carbonatite, mixed with an organic material that could not be identified. Dr. Oduya speculated that the area might have been disturbed at some point in the past, possibly during the bridge's original construction. He did not mention the sound, but a handwritten note in the margin of his field journal, photographed by an assistant and later posted online, reads, "Humming again. 2:47 p.m. No source visible." The Sillyville Bog Bridge remains in use today, though it is scheduled for renovation in 2026. Town officials have proposed reinforcing the foundation and replacing several rotted beams. No acoustic monitoring is planned. The creek below continues to flow, shallow and silent. But those who have heard the recordings know that silence is not the same as quiet. Somewhere beneath the water, beneath the mud, beneath the old granite blocks that have held the bridge in place for over a century, something continues to speak. It does not hurry. It does not stop. And if you slowed yourself down enough to listen, really listen, you might finally understand what it has been trying to say. Or you might realize that some messages are not meant to be received, only endured. Some roads bring you back whether you meant to return or not. The Durgan-covered bridge spans the Cold River in Sandwich, New Hampshire, a town of approximately 1,300 residents nestled between the Squam Range and the southern edge of the White Mountain National Forest. Built in 1869, the bridge is one of the oldest in Carroll County, 75 feet of weathered timber and hand-cut granite, carrying a single lane of traffic along Durgan Bridge Road. The route connects the village center to a series of rural homesteads scattered along the slopes of Mount Israel. Sandwich is the kind of place where roads wind without logic, where cell service fails without warning, and where locals navigate by landmarks rather than signs. The Durgan Bridge sits at the heart of this geography, crossing the cold river at a point where the water runs fast and shallow over a bed of glacial stone. In summer, the surrounding forest is dense and green. In winter, the snow piles high against the bridge's entrances, and the road becomes impassable for days at a time. It is a quiet place, an ordinary place, except for what happens when you try to leave. The first documented incident occurred on August 14, 1987. A woman named Rosemary Fontaine, 51 years old, was driving east through the Durgan Bridge on her way to a medical appointment in Tamworth. She had lived in Sandwich for over 20 years and had crossed the bridge hundreds of times without incident. The weather was clear, the road was dry, she was alone. According to a statement she gave to the Carroll County Sheriff's Office 3 days later, she entered the bridge heading east at approximately 9:15 in the morning. She remembered the familiar darkness of the interior, the rattle of her tires on the wooden planks, the brief flash of sunlight as she emerged on the far side. Then she was approaching the bridge again, from the west. She had no memory of turning around, no memory of stopping, no sense of lost time. One moment she was leaving the bridge behind her. The next, she was facing its entrance once more, her car pointed in the direction she had just come from. She crossed again. The same thing happened. On the third attempt, she stopped her car before entering and sat for several minutes, watching the bridge. Nothing appeared unusual. She turned around manually, drove west toward the village center, and took a different route to her appointment. She arrived 40 minutes late. The distance should have taken 15. Rosemary Fontaine reported the incident to the sheriff's office, but declined to file a formal complaint. The deputy who took her statement noted that she appeared lucid but distressed. No follow-up investigation was conducted. Over the following 2 decades, 10 additional drivers reported similar experiences. The accounts varied in detail but shared the same core elements. A crossing completed in one direction, followed by an inexplicable return to the starting point. No turning, no stopping, no memory of the reversal. In 1993, a delivery driver named Malcolm Reeves experienced the phenomenon twice in a single afternoon while attempting to reach a farmhouse on the east side of the river. He eventually abandoned his route and reported the incident to his dispatcher, who logged it as driver confusion, possible fatigue. In 2001, a couple from Massachusetts named David and Elena Kowalczyk crossed the bridge while returning from a hiking trip in the White Mountains. David was driving. Elena was asleep in the passenger seat. When she woke, they were approaching the bridge from the west, the direction they had been traveling before crossing. I asked David if he'd turned around, Elena later told a journalist researching unexplained road phenomena. He looked at me like I was crazy. He said we'd just crossed the bridge, but the GPS said we were back where we started. The Kowalczyk's GPS unit, a Garmin Street Pilot, model year 2000, recorded their route automatically. When they reviewed the data that evening, they found no deviation. The track showed a continuous eastward path through the bridge, with no loops, no U-turns, no stops. Yet they had ended up facing west. David Kowalczyk submitted the GPS data to Garmin's technical support department, asking for an explanation. The response, received 3 weeks later, stated that the device was functioning within normal parameters and that the recorded track accurately reflects the vehicle's movement. No explanation was offered for the discrepancy between the data and the couple's experience. In 2004, a civil engineer named Franklin Morse was hired by the town of Sandwich to assess the Durgan Bridge for potential restoration work. Morse had no knowledge of the reported incidents and approached the project as a routine structural evaluation. His assessment, completed over 3 days in October, found the bridge to be in fair condition, with some deterioration to the roof and minor settling in the eastern abutment. But in his personal notes, later obtained by a researcher through a public records request, Morse documented an unusual experience on the second day of his survey. "Crossed the bridge on foot heading east at 10:42 a.m., he wrote. "Walked approximately 200 yards beyond the eastern exit to inspect the approach road. Turned around to return to my vehicle. Found myself approaching the bridge from the east as though I had already crossed back without realizing it. Checked watch, 10:47 a.m. No memory of recrossing." Morse did not include this observation in his official report. When contacted by the researcher in 2012, he declined to comment. The most recent documented incident occurred on November 9, 2006. A high school teacher named Patricia Lundgren was driving home from a conference in Conway when she crossed the Durgan Bridge heading west. She remembered emerging from the bridge, continuing along the road for approximately 1 mile, and then, without transition, finding herself inside the bridge again, traveling east. She stopped her car in the middle of the structure and sat in the darkness for several minutes. When she finally exited, she drove directly to the Sandwich Police Station and filed a report. The officer on duty noted that she was visibly shaken and adamant that she had not turned around. Patricia Lundgren's car was equipped with a factory-installed navigation system that recorded her route. The data showed a continuous westward path through the bridge, followed by a sudden repositioning to the eastern approach, as though the vehicle had been lifted and set down facing the opposite direction. The officer forwarded the report to the Carroll County Sheriff's Office, which declined to investigate. A note in the file dated November 15, 2006 reads, "No evidence of criminal activity. No further action required." Since 2006, no additional incidents have been formally reported, but local residents speak of the bridge in careful terms. Some avoid it entirely, taking longer routes to reach the eastern side of town. Others cross only during daylight and only when accompanied. A retired postal carrier named George Halloran, who delivered mail along Durgan Bridge Road for 23 years, offered his perspective in a 2014 interview with a regional history project. "I crossed that bridge twice a day, 5 days a week, for over 2 decades, he said. Never happened to me. But I knew people it happened to, good people, honest people, not the kind to make things up. They'd tell me about it, and I could see in their eyes they weren't lying." When asked if he had any explanation, Halloran shook his head. "Some places don't work the way they're supposed to," he said. "You learn to live with it. You learn not to ask too many questions." The Durgan-covered bridge remains open to traffic today. It is listed on the National Register of Historic Places and receives modest preservation funding from the state. A small sign at the western entrance notes its construction date and historical significance. It does not mention the 11 drivers who crossed heading east and arrived heading west. It does not mention the GPS tracks that showed no deviation. It does not mention the 5 minutes that Patricia Lundgren lost inside the bridge, 5 minutes that, according to her navigation system, never existed. Some crossings are not meant to be completed. And some bridges, it seems, have their own ideas about which direction you're allowed to go. Some farewells are never finished. The Blair-covered bridge crosses the Pemigewasset River in Campton, New Hampshire, a small town of approximately 3,500 residents in Grafton County. Built in 1829, it is one of the oldest covered bridges in the state and among the few still carrying regular traffic. The structure stretches nearly 300 feet across water that runs cold and fast from the White Mountains, cutting through a landscape of pine forest and exposed granite ledge. Campton sits at the intersection of 2 highways, a waypoint for travelers heading north toward Franconia Notch or west toward the Lakes region. Most pass through without stopping. The Blair Bridge is visible from the main road but requires a short detour to cross, a fact that has kept it relatively quiet despite its age and historic significance. The bridge's interior is dark even on bright days, the wooden walls blocking most of the ambient light. At dusk, when the sun drops behind the western hills, the far entrance becomes a rectangle of orange and gold, framing whatever stands silhouetted against it. For over 60 years, people have reported seeing someone standing there. The earliest known account comes from a trucking manifest dated September 19, 1958. A driver named Earl Hodgkins, hauling lumber from Lincoln to Plymouth, noted in his log that he had slowed to let a pedestrian clear the bridge near the Campton crossing. He described the figure as a woman in light-colored clothing standing near the eastern entrance, appearing to wave at passing vehicles. When he reached the exit, no one was there. Hodgkins mentioned the incident to a foreman the following morning, who dismissed it as a trick of the light. But over the following decade, similar reports accumulated. Casual observations from locals, passing remarks in letters, brief mentions in town meeting minutes. Always the same details. A woman in a pale dress, standing inside the bridge at dusk, waving, always with her back to the setting sun. In 1964, a state trooper named Richard Pelletier filed an official report after receiving multiple calls about a possible stranded motorist near the Blair Bridge. He arrived at dusk and observed what he described as a female figure in white or cream-colored clothing, approximately 30 to 40 years of age, standing motionless near the center of the bridge. Pelletier approached on foot. By the time he reached the entrance, the figure was gone. He searched the bridge and the surrounding riverbank for 20 minutes. He found no one. His report concluded with a recommendation that the area be monitored for potential trespassers, but no follow-up action was taken. The most significant piece of evidence emerged in 1971. On the evening of August 12th, a photographer named Bernard Laflamme was driving through Campton on assignment for the Laconia Evening Citizen. He had been hired to document covered bridges in the region for a tourism supplement scheduled to run the following month. The Blair Bridge was his final stop of the day. Laflamme arrived at approximately 6:45 in the evening. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the road. He parked near the western entrance and spent several minutes adjusting his equipment, a Nikon F2 with a 50mm lens loaded with Kodak Tri-X black and white film. As he raised the camera to frame the bridge's entrance, he noticed a figure inside, a woman standing near the center of the structure, facing east. She wore a pale dress that caught the fading light. Her right arm was raised, hand open, as though waving to someone on the far side of the river. Laflamme assumed she was a local resident, perhaps waiting for a ride. He called out to ask if she would mind stepping aside for his photograph. She did not respond. He took the picture anyway. When the film was developed 3 days later, the image showed the interior of the Blair-covered bridge at dusk, exactly as Laflamme remembered. But the woman was different. In the photograph, she was facing west, toward the camera. Her arm was at her side. Her face was partially visible, though obscured by shadow. She appeared to be looking directly at the lens. Laflamme was certain she had been facing the opposite direction. He was certain her arm had been raised. He contacted the newspaper's editor, who examined the negative and confirmed that it had not been altered. The image was included in the tourism supplement without comment, captioned simply, "Blair-covered bridge, Campton, N.H., built 1829. No one mentioned the woman. Laflamme kept a copy of the photograph in his personal files until his death in 2002. His daughter, Marguerite Laflamme Poirier, donated his archive to the New Hampshire Historical Society in 2008. The image is now cataloged as Item Number 1971-08-12-BL, available for viewing by appointment. A note attached to the file, written in Laflamme's handwriting, reads, "She turned. I don't know when, I don't know how, but she turned." In the decades since, the woman has continued to appear. A retired school principal named Dorothy Anderson reported seeing her in 1983 while driving home from a conference in Plymouth. A traveling salesman named Hector Villanueva described her in a letter to his wife in 1991, noting that she looked sad, like someone waiting for a bus that would never come. A group of college students photographed the bridge in 2004 and later claimed that one of their images showed a faint figure near the eastern entrance, though the photograph was too underexposed to confirm. In 2010, a paranormal investigation team from Massachusetts conducted an overnight study at the Blair Bridge with the permission of the town. Their report, published on a now-defunct website, documented several anomalies: unexplained drops in temperature near the bridge's center, brief audio disturbances on their recording equipment, and a single photograph that appeared to show a humanoid shape in the far entrance. The team's lead investigator, a woman named Jocelyn Park, described her impressions in a video interview recorded on site. "There's a presence here," she said, "not threatening, not angry, just waiting, like someone who missed their chance to leave and doesn't know the moment has passed." She paused, glancing toward the bridge behind her. "I think she's still waving. I think she never stopped." Local historians have attempted to identify the woman without success. No death records from the 19th or early 20th century match the descriptions. No missing persons cases correspond to the location or time frame. The bridge has no documented history of accidents or tragedies, unusual for a structure of its age. But one detail has surfaced repeatedly in local folklore, passed down through families who have lived in Campton for generations. In 1874, a young woman from the village reportedly walked to the Blair Bridge on the evening before her wedding. She was seen standing at the eastern entrance, waving to a carriage approaching from the Plymouth Road. The carriage, according to the story, never arrived. The woman's name has been lost. No marriage record exists. No obituary has been found. But the story persists, and with it, the suggestion that she is still there, still waiting, still waving to someone who will never come. Today, the Blair-covered bridge is open to traffic and draws steady interest from tourists and history enthusiasts. A small plaque at the western entrance notes its construction date and architectural style. Visitors cross without incident, pausing occasionally to photograph the weathered timbers and the river below. Most see nothing unusual, but those who arrive at dusk, when the light falls just right, sometimes report a flicker of movement in their peripheral vision. A pale shape near the center of the bridge, an arm raised in greeting or farewell. They look again, and she is gone. Or perhaps she was never facing them at all. Perhaps, like the photograph suggests, she only turns when no one is watching. And perhaps the wave was never meant for the living. Some distances refuse to be fixed. Rowell's covered bridge crosses the Contoocook River in Hopkinton, New Hampshire, a town of approximately 6,000 residents in Merrimack County. Built in 1853, the bridge served as a primary crossing for farmers transporting goods between the villages of Hopkinton and Contoocook until a concrete span was constructed a quarter-mile downstream in 1961. Today, the covered bridge carries only foot traffic and the occasional cyclist, preserved as a historical landmark, but largely forgotten by the wider world. The Contoocook River is slow-moving here, winding through a valley of dairy farms and second-growth forest. The bridge itself is a long truss design, painted the traditional barn red, with a wooden deck that creaks under even modest weight. It is unremarkable in almost every respect, one of dozens of covered bridges scattered across central New Hampshire, maintained by local historical societies and visited by a modest number of tourists each year. What makes Rowell's Bridge unusual is not what it looks like, it is what it measures. In the spring of 1923, the New Hampshire State Highway Department commissioned a comprehensive survey of covered bridges in Merrimack County. The purpose was to assess structural integrity and determine which bridges warranted preservation funding. A team of 3 surveyors, led by a civil engineer named Clarence Milliken, spent 6 weeks documenting dimensions, materials, and conditions at 17 different sites. Rowell's Bridge was measured on April 14, 1923. According to the original survey document, archived at the New Hampshire Division of Historical Resources, the bridge's total length was recorded as 166 feet, measured from the outer edge of one portal to the outer edge of the other. The measurement was taken twice by 2 different surveyors using a calibrated steel tape. Both readings matched. 16 years later, in 1939, a follow-up survey was conducted as part of a Depression-era infrastructure assessment. A new team using updated equipment measured Rowell's Bridge at 164 feet and 7 inches, a discrepancy of nearly 18 inches. The surveyors noted the difference but attributed it to potential errors in the original 1923 measurement. No further investigation was conducted. In 1952, a University of New Hampshire engineering class visited the bridge as part of a field study on historic timber construction. The students, supervised by a professor named Dr. Edwin Callaway, measured the bridge using a combination of steel tape and optical transit. Their recorded length, 167 feet and 2 inches. Dr. Callaway reviewed the previous survey data and found the discrepancies troubling. He returned to the bridge 3 weeks later with a colleague and measured again. This time, the length was 165 feet and 9 inches. He did not publish his findings, but he did leave a note in his personal journal discovered after his death in 1984 and later donated to the university archives. "The bridge does not hold its shape," he wrote. "I cannot explain this. I can only document it." Over the following decades, measurements continued to vary. In 1967, a state preservation officer recorded the bridge at 166 feet and 4 inches. In 1973, a local historical society documented it at 164 feet and 11 inches. In 1981, a graduate student conducting research on covered bridge construction techniques measured 167 feet exactly. No 2 measurements have ever matched, and no measurement has ever repeated. In 1994, a structural engineer named Margaret Selby was hired by the town of Hopkinton to assess Rowell's Bridge for potential restoration work. Selby had over 20 years of experience in historic preservation and had surveyed more than 40 covered bridges across New England. She approached the project with professional skepticism. Her initial measurement, taken on June 7, 1994, recorded the bridge at 165 feet and 3 inches. She found this unremarkable until she reviewed the historical survey data provided by the town clerk. "I assumed the older measurements were simply less accurate," she said in a 2008 interview with a regional preservation journal. Surveying technology has improved significantly since the 1920s, but when I compared the full data set, I realized the variance wasn't decreasing over time, it was random. Selby returned to the bridge 4 times over the following month, each time using different equipment: a laser distance meter, a traditional steel tape, a surveyor's wheel, and an optical rangefinder. Her measurements ranged from 164 feet and 8 inches to 166 feet and 11 inches. None matched her original reading. None matched each other. She contacted the New Hampshire Division of Historical Resources and requested access to all available survey records for Rowell's Bridge. The file contained 17 separate measurements spanning 71 years. Not one was repeated. Selby included a brief note in her final restoration report, flagging the anomaly for future investigators. The note was removed by a town administrator before the report was filed, on the grounds that it was outside the scope of the assessment. When asked about this decision in 2012, the administrator, who had since retired, declined to comment. In 2003, An amateur researcher named Thomas Keeley became interested in the bridge after reading about Selby's unpublished findings in an online forum dedicated to unexplained phenomena. Keeley, a retired land surveyor from Concord, organized a volunteer effort to document the bridge's dimensions using multiple methods simultaneously. On October 11, 2003, Keeley and 4 volunteers measured the bridge using 5 different instruments at the same moment. A laser meter recorded 165 feet and 6 inches. A steel tape recorded 166 feet and 1 inch. A surveyor's wheel recorded 164 feet and 10 inches. An ultrasonic distance sensor recorded 165 feet and 11 inches. A traditional cloth tape recorded 166 feet and 5 inches. 5 measurements, 5 different results, all taken at the same time. Keeley documented his findings in a detailed report, which he submitted to several engineering journals. All declined to publish it. One editor responded with a single sentence, "This is not possible." Keeley continued his research until 2009, when declining health forced him to abandon the project. His complete data set, 43 individual measurements taken over 6 years, is now archived at the Hopkinton Historical Society. The variance across all measurements spans exactly 3 feet, from a minimum of 164 feet and 2 inches to a maximum of 167 feet and 2 inches. The pattern, if it can be called a pattern, has never been explained. Structural engineers have proposed various theories: thermal expansion of the timber, settling of the stone abutments, optical distortion caused by the bridge's interior geometry. None account for the magnitude or randomness of the variance. None explain why the measurements never repeat. Town records confirm that no structural modifications have been made to Rowell's Bridge since its construction in 1853. The timbers are original. The abutments have not been rebuilt. The portals have not been widened or narrowed. The bridge, by all accounts, has not changed, only its length. Today, Rowell's covered bridge remains open to pedestrian traffic. A small informational sign at the eastern entrance notes its construction date and architectural style. It does not mention the measurements. It does not mention the variance. But those who know the history approach the bridge with a certain unease. A local teacher named Constance Bergeron, who has lived in Hopkinton for over 40 years, described the feeling in a 2016 interview with a regional history project. "I've walked through that bridge hundreds of times," she said, "and every time I swear it feels different. Sometimes it seems to take forever to reach the other side. Sometimes I'm through before I realize I've started." She paused, staring at something beyond the interviewer's shoulder. "I don't measure it anymore. I used to when I was younger. But I stopped because the numbers never made sense. And after a while I realized I didn't want to know." The bridge stands where it has always stood, crossing the same river, connecting the same banks. But the distance between them, the space that should be fixed, should be knowable, should be the same every time, continues to shift. 164 feet, 167 feet, something in between, never the same twice. And no one has ever been able to say which measurement is the real one, or if any of them are. Some secrets are kept by the places that receive them. The bump-covered bridge crosses the Beebe River in Campton, New Hampshire, a town of approximately 3,500 residents in Grafton County. Built in 1877, the bridge is modest in scale, just under 50 feet long, a single lane wide, with a gabled roof and vertical plank siding that has weathered to a silver gray. It carries light traffic along a back road connecting Route 49 to a cluster of homes near the base of Tenney Mountain. The Beebe River runs shallow here, barely more than a stream in late summer, though spring snowmelt can raise it several feet within hours. The bridge sits low to the water, its stone abutments stained dark with decades of seasonal flooding. It is not a destination, merely a crossing, used by locals and ignored by tourists who pass through Campton on their way to the ski resorts farther north. For nearly 140 years, the bump bridge served its purpose without incident or attention. Then came the restoration. In the spring of 2016, the New Hampshire Department of Transportation allocated funds for structural repairs to several historic covered bridges in Grafton County. The bump bridge was included in the project due to concerns about water damage to its western abutment and deterioration of the interior siding. A crew of 4 workers, led by a foreman named Daniel Mercier, began the restoration on April 18th. Their first task was to remove several damaged planks from the bridge's interior walls to assess the condition of the underlying frame. On the second day, a worker named Luis Aguilar pried loose a vertical board near the bridge's center and found something unexpected: a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, wedged between the plank and the structural beam behind it. He handed it to Mercier, who unfolded it carefully. The paper was brittle but legible. Written in faded pencil in a cramped and careful hand were 3 sentences. "I took money from the church collection, $12. May God forgive me." There was no signature, no date, no indication of who had written it or when. Mercier assumed it was an isolated curiosity, perhaps a child's prank or a forgotten note from decades past. He set it aside and continued the work. By the end of the week, the crew had found 17 more. They were hidden throughout the bridge's interior walls, slipped between planks, tucked into joints, folded into crevices that would have been invisible to anyone not dismantling the structure. Some were written on paper, others were scratched directly into the wood with a knife or nail. A few were inscribed on fragments of birch bark. All were confessions. The content varied. Some admitted to minor offenses: a lie told to a spouse, a borrowed tool never returned, a kiss stolen from a neighbor's wife. Others described more serious transgressions: embezzlement, arson, abandonment. Several mentioned names, both the confessor and the person wronged. Mercier contacted the New Hampshire Division of Historical Resources, which dispatched an archivist named Dr. Rebecca Thornton to examine the findings. Over the following 3 weeks, Thornton and her team cataloged 214 individual confessions recovered from the bump-covered bridge. The oldest appeared to date from 1893, based on references to specific local events and the style of handwriting. The most recent was dated November 2012, a confession written on a torn corner of notebook paper, admitting to the theft of prescription medication from an elderly relative. Dr. Thornton's preliminary report, submitted to the state in July of 2016, described the discovery as unprecedented in the documentation of regional folklore. Confession practices tied to specific locations are not unknown in New England, she wrote, but the scale and longevity of this collection suggest a sustained tradition spanning more than a century. The bridge appears to have functioned as an informal confessional, a place where individuals could unburden themselves anonymously, trusting the structure itself to hold their secrets. She recommended further analysis, particularly of the confessions that contained verifiable details. There were 17 of those. A graduate student named Michael Ostrowski, working under Dr. Thornton's supervision, cross-referenced the confessions against historical records held by the Grafton County Courthouse, the New Hampshire State Archives, and several local historical societies. The results were disturbing. One confession, dated approximately 1907 based on paper composition and ink analysis, described a fire set deliberately at a barn in Plymouth. County records confirmed that a barn owned by a farmer named Josiah Whitcomb burned on September 3, 1907. The cause was never determined. The confession named the arsonist, a man identified only as R.M., and stated that the fire was set in retaliation for an unpaid debt. No R.M. appeared in census records for Plymouth during that period. But a man named Reuben Marsh was listed as a laborer in nearby Holderness and was known to have had financial disputes with several landowners in the region. He disappeared from all records after 1909. Another confession, written on birch bark and likely dating from the 1890s, described the drowning of a child in the Pemigewasset River. The writer claimed to have witnessed the incident and done nothing to intervene. The child's name was given as Little Samuel Pratt. A death certificate filed with Grafton County in August of 1894 records the drowning of Samuel Pratt, age 6, in the Pemigewasset River near Woodstock. The death was ruled accidental. No witnesses were ever identified. A third confession, dated 1931, admitted to the poisoning of livestock belonging to a neighbor. County agricultural records confirmed an outbreak of unexplained cattle deaths on a farm in Rumney that year. The affected farmer, a man named Henrik Johansson, lost 11 head of cattle over 6 weeks. The cause was never determined. The confession named the perpetrator, the farmer's own brother-in-law, and described the method, arsenic mixed into the feed. Ostrowski compiled his findings in a 73-page report, submitted to Dr. Thornton in September of 2016. He identified 17 confessions that corresponded to documented incidents in Grafton County records, crimes that had been investigated, abandoned, and eventually forgotten. 16 remained officially unsolved. The 17th was different. A confession recovered from the bridge's northeastern corner, written on a water-stained index card, described a hit-and-run accident on Route 49 in 1987. The writer admitted to striking a pedestrian with their vehicle and fleeing the scene. The victim's name was not given, but the date, October 14th, and the location, just past the bump bridge, were specific. Grafton County records confirmed that a man named Terrence Wojcik was struck and killed by an unidentified vehicle on Route 49 on October 14, 1987. The case was never solved. But when Ostrowski attempted to locate the original index card for further analysis, he was told it had been transferred to the custody of the New Hampshire State Police. No explanation was given. His subsequent requests for access were denied. The bump bridge restoration was completed in November of 2016. The confessions, those that remained, were placed in archival storage at the Division of Historical Resources. A small selection was displayed at the Campton Historical Society behind glass, with identifying details redacted. The exhibit drew modest interest for several months before closing quietly in the spring of 2017, but the confessions have not stopped. In 2019, a maintenance worker conducting a routine inspection of the bridge discovered a new note wedged between 2 planks near the eastern entrance. It was written on a post-it note in blue ink and contained a single sentence. "I knew what he was doing to her, and I said nothing." No name, no date, no context. The worker reported the discovery to the town clerk, who filed it without comment. No investigation was conducted. Local residents have long known about the bridge's reputation, though few speak of it openly. A retired school teacher named Lorraine Dufresne, who has lived in Campton for over 60 years, described the tradition in a 2018 interview. "People have always gone there to leave things behind," she said, "things they couldn't carry anymore, things they couldn't say out loud. The bridge doesn't judge, it just holds on." When asked if she had ever left a confession of her own, Dufresne paused for a long moment. "Some questions," she said finally, "are better left between the boards." The bump-covered bridge remains open to traffic today. Its walls have been reinforced, its planks replaced, its structures secured against another century of use. Visitors cross without knowing what the wood once held, what it may still hold, in the spaces too small to see. And somewhere in Grafton County, there are crimes that will never be solved, not because the truth was never spoken, but because the only one listening was a bridge. Some reflections show more than what stands above them. The Stark-covered bridge crosses the upper Ammonoosuc River in Stark, New Hampshire, a village of fewer than 500 residents in Coast County. Built in 1862, the bridge stretches 158 feet across water that runs clear and cold from the slopes of the White Mountains. It is one of the most photographed covered bridges in New England, its red wooden frame set against a backdrop of white church steeple and autumn foliage that has appeared on countless calendars, postcards, and tourism brochures. Stark itself is a place of austere beauty. The village sits in a narrow valley surrounded by dense forest and granite ridges that turn gold and crimson each October. The population has never exceeded 600, and the main road, Route 110, carries only modest traffic between Berlin and Groveton. Most visitors come for the scenery, stay for an hour, and leave without speaking to anyone who lives there. The bridge is the village's most famous landmark. It has been restored twice, in 1955 and 2001, and remains open to vehicle traffic despite its age. On clear days, its reflection shimmers in the Ammonoosuc below, a perfect inversion of timber and shadow. Almost perfect. The first documented anomaly was captured on October 12, 1958. A landscape photographer named William Ashford, working on assignment for a Boston travel magazine, spent the morning shooting the Stark Bridge from various angles. He arrived at 11:30 and set up his tripod on the southern riverbank, framing the bridge with the church steeple visible in the background. The sky was cloudless. The water was still. Ashford exposed 3 frames over the course of 20 minutes. When the film was developed a week later, 2 images were unremarkable, standard compositions of the bridge and its surroundings. The third was different. In the reflection on the water's surface, beside the familiar shape of the Stark-covered bridge, there appeared a second structure. It was smaller, perhaps 2/3 the size of the main bridge, and narrower, with a slightly different roofline. It appeared to be constructed of darker wood. Though the image was in black and white, it cast its own shadow on the water. But when Ashford looked at the upper portion of the frame, the actual riverbank, the actual bridge, there was nothing beside it. Only the Stark-covered bridge, alone, as it had always been. Ashford assumed the anomaly was a processing error, or perhaps a reflection of something outside the frame, a barn, a shed, some structure on the opposite bank that had caught the light at an unusual angle. He contacted the magazine's photo editor, who examined the negative and confirmed that the image had not been double exposed or manipulated. The editor chose not to publish the photograph. Ashford kept the negative in his personal archive, where it remained until his death in 1991. Over the following decades, similar images surfaced. In 1963, an amateur photographer named Dolores Fitzpatrick captured the second bridge while visiting Stark on a leaf-peeping trip. She noticed the anomaly only after returning home to Connecticut and reviewing her slides. The structure appeared in the reflection, but not above the waterline. In 1977, a high school photography student named Kevin Arsenault took a series of images of the bridge for a class project. One frame, exposed at 12:15 in the afternoon, showed the phantom structure clearly, a narrow covered bridge, slightly offset from the main one, visible only in the river's surface. In 1984, a professional photographer named Ingrid Haugen was commissioned by the New Hampshire Division of Travel and Tourism to produce a series of promotional images featuring covered bridges. Her photograph of the Stark Bridge, taken at midday in mid-October, showed the same anomaly. She reported it to her editor, who dismissed it as a lens artifact. Haugen disagreed. She returned to Stark the following week at the same time of day and attempted to recreate the image. The second bridge did not appear. She returned again the following year. This time it did. By 2005, at least 40 independent photographs had documented the phenomenon. The images came from professionals and amateurs, tourists and locals, film cameras and digital sensors. The equipment varied. The photographers varied. The years varied. But certain details remained constant. The second bridge always appeared in autumn, between late September and early November. It always appeared at midday, within an hour of noon. It always appeared in the reflection only, never above the waterline. And it always appeared in the same position, to the east of the main bridge, slightly downstream, as though the two structures had once stood side by side. In 2008, a retired civil engineer named Harold Bergstrom compiled the available photographs into a detailed analysis. He measured the Phantom Bridge's dimensions based on its proportional relationship to the known structure and estimated its length at approximately 105 feet, significantly shorter than the Stark Bridge's 158. He also noted that the Phantom's roofline was steeper than the main bridge's, consistent with earlier covered bridge designs from the 1830s and 1840s. If this structure ever existed, Bergstrom wrote in a self-published monograph, it would have predated the current bridge by at least 20 years. But no historical record confirms its presence. He was not entirely correct. In 2011, a local historian named Pauline Grenier discovered a partial survey map in the Coast County Registry of Deeds. The map, dated 1841, depicted the Ammonoosuc River crossing at Stark and showed two structures spanning the water, one labeled Town Bridge and a second, smaller one labeled Percy Crossing. The Percy Crossing was positioned to the east of the main bridge, slightly downstream. Grenier searched for additional documentation, but found almost nothing. A single reference in the 1843 town meeting minutes noted that the old Percy Bridge had been condemned and removed following a spring flood. No other records survived, no photographs existed, no drawings, no descriptions of its appearance. But the survey map showed its location, precisely where the Phantom Bridge appears, in the reflected photographs. The mystery deepened in 2014 when a geologist named Dr. Ananya Mehta conducted a sonar survey of the riverbed near the Stark Bridge as part of an unrelated study on sediment patterns. Her scans revealed an unusual formation approximately 40 feet east of the current bridge, a series of rectangular stone shapes buried beneath 2 feet of silt, arranged in a pattern consistent with bridge abutments. Dr. Mehta's report, submitted to the New Hampshire Geological Survey, noted that the stones appeared to be hand-cut granite, similar to the abutments supporting the existing bridge. Their size and spacing suggested a structure of approximately 100 feet in length. She recommended excavation to confirm the findings, but funding was not approved. The stones remain buried beneath the Ammonoosuc. Local residents have long been aware of the photographs, though opinions vary on their significance. A convenience store owner named Ray Bouchard, whose family has lived in Stark for 4 generations, offered his perspective in a 2017 interview. "My grandfather used to talk about the old crossing," he said his father remembered it, just barely. "It came down before the Civil War, washed out in a flood. They built the new bridge right next to where it stood." When asked about the photographs, Bouchard shrugged. "Rivers remember things," he said. "Maybe the water still sees what used to be there. Maybe it doesn't know the difference between then and now." He paused, glancing toward the window. "Or maybe we're the ones who forgot." The Stark-covered bridge remains one of the most visited landmarks in northern New Hampshire. Each autumn, photographers line the riverbank, waiting for the light to fall just right, hoping to capture the perfect reflection. Some of them get more than they expected. The images continue to surface on social media, in amateur photography forums, in the archives of those who notice something wrong only after they return home. A second bridge, narrow and dark, standing beside the one that everyone can see. No one has ever explained why the river reflects what no longer exists. No one has ever explained why it happens only at midday, only in autumn, only when the conditions are exactly right. And no one has ever answered the question that lingers beneath every photograph. If the Percy Crossing was destroyed in 1843, why does the water still remember it? Perhaps some things, once built, never truly disappear. Perhaps some crossings remain, long after the wood has rotted and the stones have sunk beneath the silt. And perhaps the river, patient and silent, is still waiting for someone to notice what it has been trying to show them all along. Some boundaries exist that no map has ever drawn. The Cornish-Windsor covered bridge spans the Connecticut River between Cornish, New Hampshire, and Windsor, Vermont, connecting two states across 460 feet of timber and history. Built in 1866, it is the longest covered bridge in New Hampshire and the longest two-span covered bridge in the United States. The structure carries a single lane of traffic along a wooden deck that creaks and groans under the weight of passing vehicles, its lattice trusses darkened by more than a century and a half of river air and engine exhaust. The Connecticut River runs wide and slow beneath the bridge, marking the border between two states that share a history but have never quite shared an identity. Vermont lies to the west, its hills rolling toward the Green Mountains. New Hampshire lies to the east, its terrain flattening toward the Merrimack Valley. The bridge connects them, as it has since the aftermath of the Civil War, carrying farmers and merchants and tourists across water that has frozen solid in winter and flooded its banks in spring. It is a functional structure, a historical landmark, and, according to those who have studied it closely, something else entirely. The temperature anomaly was first documented in 1961. A meteorologist named Dr. Howard Beckwith, working for the National Weather Service office in Concord, was conducting a regional survey of microclimate variations along the Connecticut River Valley. His study involved placing portable thermometers at various points along the river, including several covered bridges that might create localized temperature effects due to their enclosed structures. On September 14, 1961, Beckwith placed 4 thermometers inside the Cornish-Windsor Bridge, one near the New Hampshire entrance, one near the Vermont entrance, and 2 at the midpoint, one on each side of the state line, which is marked by a small brass plate embedded in the floor. He recorded his readings at 3-hour intervals over 48 hours. The results puzzled him. The thermometer near the New Hampshire entrance consistently read between 62 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on time of day. The thermometer near the Vermont entrance read between 50 and 53 degrees. The difference, approximately 12 degrees, remained constant, regardless of external conditions, time of day, or cloud cover. More strangely, the 2 thermometers at the midpoint, placed just 18 inches apart on opposite sides of the brass state line marker, showed the same 12-degree variance. The New Hampshire side read 63 degrees. The Vermont side read 51. Beckwith assumed his equipment was faulty. He replaced all 4 thermometers and repeated the experiment. The results were identical. He noted the anomaly in his field journal, but did not include it in his official report. A handwritten annotation in the margin reads, "Cannot explain. Revisit if time permits." He never returned. The phenomenon remained undocumented in scientific literature until 1978, when a physics professor named Dr. Lillian Marchetti from Dartmouth College brought a group of undergraduate students to the bridge as part of a field exercise on heat transfer and thermodynamics. The exercise was meant to demonstrate how enclosed wooden structures moderate temperature fluctuations. Instead, it revealed something the students could not explain. Using digital thermocouples, more precise than Beckwith's mercury instruments, Marchetti's team recorded a consistent 11.8-degree difference between the 2 halves of the bridge. The boundary corresponded exactly to the state line. The temperature dropped sharply within a span of less than 2 feet, as though an invisible wall separated the two zones. Marchetti repeated the measurements over 3 consecutive days. The variance held steady, 11 to 12 degrees, always cooler on the Vermont side, always warmer on the New Hampshire side. She submitted a paper to the Journal of Applied Physics describing the findings. It was rejected. One reviewer commented that the results were inconsistent with known thermodynamic principles and suggested equipment malfunction or observer error. Marchetti kept her data, but did not pursue publication further. Her original field notes are now archived in Dartmouth's Rauner Special Collections Library. In 1992, a team of engineers from the New Hampshire Department of Transportation conducted an infrared thermal imaging survey of the bridge as part of a preservation assessment. The survey was intended to identify areas of heat loss or moisture damage that might indicate structural weakness. The thermal images showed something unexpected, a sharp vertical line running through the center of the bridge, dividing the structure into 2 distinct thermal zones. The New Hampshire side appeared orange and yellow on the infrared scale, warmer. The Vermont side appeared blue and green, cooler. The boundary was crisp, almost unnaturally so, as though drawn with a ruler. The lead engineer, a man named Curtis Blanchard, noted the anomaly in his report but could not explain it. Thermal imaging typically shows gradual transitions, he wrote. The abrupt division observed at the state line has no apparent structural cause. Both halves of the bridge are constructed from identical materials and receive equivalent solar exposure. He recommended further investigation. None was conducted. But the temperature was not the only anomaly. In 2004, a veterinarian named Dr. Sandra Peliquin was driving across the Cornish-Windsor Bridge with her 2 dogs, a Labrador retriever named Baxter and a border collie named Sage, when both animals began exhibiting signs of distress. Baxter whined and pressed himself against the back seat. Sage refused to look forward, keeping her head turned toward the rear window. Peliquin stopped the car near the midpoint of the bridge to check on the animals. When she opened the door, Baxter bolted from the vehicle and ran back toward the New Hampshire entrance. Sage followed. Neither dog would re-enter the bridge. Peliquin walked both animals across on leashes, but their behavior grew increasingly agitated as they approached the center. At the brass state line marker, both dogs stopped, planted their feet, and refused to proceed. She eventually had to carry Sage across the line, while a passing motorist helped with Baxter. She mentioned the incident to colleagues at her veterinary practice. Over the following months, 3 other pet owners reported similar experiences: dogs that balked at the midpoint, cats that yowled when carried across, a horse that reared and refused to continue. In 2009, a graduate student in animal behavior named Jennifer Whitfield conducted an informal study of the phenomenon. She recruited 12 dog owners willing to walk their pets across the bridge while she observed and recorded their behavior. Of the 12 dogs, 9 exhibited signs of hesitation or distress at or near the midpoint. 4 refused to cross the state line without physical encouragement. 2 turned and fled back toward the entrance they had come from. Whitfield did not publish her findings, but her thesis advisor, a professor of psychology at the University of Vermont, noted them in a footnote to a paper on animal spatial perception. The Cornish-Windsor Bridge presents an unusual case study, he wrote. Animals appear to perceive a boundary that humans cannot detect through ordinary senses. Whether this relates to temperature, electromagnetic variation, or some other factor remains unknown. Local residents on both sides of the river have their own theories. A retired farmer named Donald Braithwaite, who has lived in Cornish for over 70 years, described the bridge in a 2015 interview with a regional history project. "My father used to say the river didn't want to be crossed there," he said the Abenaki never built anything at that spot. They'd cross upstream or downstream, but never right there. When they put the bridge in, people thought the old stories would fade. They didn't. When asked about the temperature difference, Braithwaite nodded slowly. Cold side, warm side. That's what we always called it. Vermont's the cold side, always has been. Don't ask me why, I just know it's true. He paused, looking out toward the river. The dogs know it too. They feel something we don't. Or maybe we do feel it, and we just learn to ignore it. In 2018, a team of researchers from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology conducted the most comprehensive study of the bridge to date. Using an array of sensors measuring temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, electromagnetic fields, and infrasound, they collected data over a 72-hour period in early October. Their findings confirmed the temperature anomaly, a consistent 11.6-degree difference between the two halves of the bridge, with the boundary corresponding precisely to the state line. They found no variation in humidity, pressure, or electromagnetic activity that could account for the phenomenon. The team's report, circulated internally but never published, concluded with a single sentence. The temperature differential at the Cornish-Windsor covered bridge cannot be explained by any known physical mechanism. The bridge remains open to traffic today. Thousands of vehicles cross it each year, most without noticing anything unusual. The wooden deck still creaks. The timbers still groan. The river still flows beneath, cold and indifferent. But those who know the stories sometimes pause at the midpoint, where the brass plate marks the line between two states. They feel the air change, warmer on one side, cooler on the other. And they wonder what they're crossing. Not just a river, not just a state line. Something older, something that was there before the bridge, before the towns, before anyone thought to draw a boundary on a map. And somewhere beneath the water, the river keeps its secrets, just as it always has, just as it always will. Some messages arrive for people who no longer exist. The blacksmith shop covered bridge crosses Mill Brook in Cornish, New Hampshire, a town of approximately 1,600 residents in Sullivan County. Built in 1881, the bridge is small, just over 96 feet long, and takes its name from a blacksmith shop that once operated nearby, though the shop itself vanished before the turn of the 20th century. The structure carries a quiet road through a landscape of dairy farms and sugar maple groves, connecting nothing of particular importance to anywhere most people need to go. Cornish is best known as the former home of Augustus St. Gaudens, the sculptor, whose estate is now a National Historic Site. Artists and writers settled here in the late 19th century, drawn by the light and the solitude. Most of them are gone now, their studios converted to private homes or left to decay in the woods. The town has returned to what it was before, a place of farmers and silence, where strangers are noticed and questions are rarely asked aloud. The bridge stands at the edge of this quiet. It is not a landmark. It does not appear on tourism maps. Most residents cross it without thinking, if they cross it at all. But someone has been leaving letters there for over 40 years. The first was discovered on March 7, 1982. A postal carrier named Eldon Sweeney was driving his route along Townhouse Road when he noticed something affixed to the southern entrance of the blacksmith shop bridge. He stopped to investigate and found a sealed envelope nailed to the wooden frame at approximately eye level. The envelope was plain white, unmarked except for a handwritten address on the front. The one who stayed. Sweeney assumed it was a prank. Teenagers, perhaps, or a local eccentric leaving cryptic notes for amusement. He removed the envelope and brought it to the Cornish town clerk, a woman named Miriam Foss, who opened it in his presence. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in black ink, containing a detailed description of someone's daily routine. The letter described a woman, no name given, who woke each morning at 5:45, boiled water for tea in a copper kettle, and sat by a window facing east while the sun rose. It described the way she folded her napkin after breakfast, always into thirds. It described the path she walked to check on her chickens, the order in which she fed them, the song she hummed while collecting eggs. It described the book she read in the evenings, a worn copy of something called The Proceedings of Pastor Willoughby, and the way she fell asleep in her chair before finishing a single page. The details were intimate, precise, and written with a tenderness that unsettled both Sweeney and Foss. The letter was unsigned. There was no return address. The envelope bore no postmark. It had not been mailed. Foss filed the letter with the town records and noted the incident in her daily log. She assumed someone would come forward to explain or to claim it. No one ever did. 3 years later, in April of 1985, a second letter appeared. A farmer named Wallace Grover found it nailed to the same spot, the southern entrance of the bridge at eye level. The envelope was identical, plain white, sealed, addressed to the one who stayed. This letter described a man. It detailed his habit of waking before dawn to walk the perimeter of his property, checking fences he had checked the day before. It described the way he spoke to his cows by name, the order in which he milked them, the chair he sat in afterward while listening to the radio. It described his dinner, always beans, always bread, always alone, and the way he looked at a photograph on his mantel before extinguishing the lamp. The photograph, the letter said, showed a woman in a white dress standing beside the blacksmith shop bridge. Grover brought the letter to the selectman's office. A brief investigation was conducted, but no sender was identified. The man described in the letter could not be located. No resident of Cornish matched the details. No photograph matching the description was found in any local archive. The letter was filed alongside the first. Over the following decades, additional letters appeared at irregular intervals, sometimes 2 years apart, sometimes 5, sometimes 7. By 2020, 14 letters had been documented. Each was nailed to the southern entrance of the bridge. Each was addressed to the one who stayed. Each contained a detailed description of someone's daily life, and each described a person who could not be found. In 2003, a genealogist named Catherine Aldrich was hired by the Sullivan County Historical Society to research the letters as part of a broader project on local folklore. Aldrich spent 8 months attempting to identify the individuals described. She cross-referenced the details against census records, town directories, church registries, property deeds, and death certificates spanning from 1850 to 2000. She consulted with elderly residents who had lived in Cornish for generations. She searched for the book mentioned in the first letter, The Proceedings of Pastor Willoughby, and found no evidence that it had ever been published. Her findings were inconclusive. The descriptions are too specific to be invented, Aldrich wrote in her final report. They include details that suggest intimate, prolonged observation, daily routines, personal habits, emotional patterns, and yet the individuals described do not appear in any historical record. They are not former residents. They are not deceased relatives of current families. They are, as far as I can determine, no one. She noted one additional detail that troubled her. Several letters describe the same window, she wrote. A window facing east with a view of Millbrook and the covered bridge beyond. I searched for a structure matching this description and found nothing. No house in Cornish currently has such a view, and yet the letters describe it as though it still exists, as though someone is sitting there, watching, even now. The letters have continued to appear. The most recent was discovered on October 12, 2019, by a jogger named Peter Stanhope. Like the others, it was nailed to the southern entrance of the bridge, addressed in the same handwriting, sealed in the same plain envelope. The letter described a child, a girl, approximately 8 years old, who woke each morning and pressed her face to a cold window to watch the fog lift from the brook. It described the doll she carried everywhere, a cloth doll with button eyes and yarn hair, and the way she whispered secrets to it before falling asleep. It described the song her mother sang to her, a melody the letter transcribed in musical notation. The song was not recognized by any musicologist who examined it. The melody did not match any known folk tune, hymn, or nursery rhyme in the New England tradition. Stanhope turned the letter over to the Cornish Police Department, which forwarded it to the state police. An investigator named Lieutenant Anne-Marie Boudreau examined the document and the 13 letters that preceded it. Her report, filed in January of 2020, concluded that the letters did not constitute evidence of a crime. No threats were made, no identifiable persons were named, no laws appeared to have been broken, but in a handwritten note appended to the report, a note that was later removed from the official file but preserved in a photocopy obtained by a local journalist, Boudreau wrote, "Someone is watching people who don't exist, or someone is remembering people who no longer do. I don't know which possibility is worse." The blacksmith shop covered bridge remains standing today. The southern entrance still bears faint marks where nails have been driven and removed over the years, small punctures in the weathered wood, too numerous to count. No one has ever been seen leaving a letter. No fingerprints have been recovered. No handwriting analysis has produced a match. The letters arrived without warning, without explanation, and without answer. And somewhere, perhaps in a house that no longer stands, perhaps in a window that no longer exists, someone is still being watched. Someone who stayed. Someone who may never have left. Someone whose daily routines are known, whose habits are recorded, whose life is documented in letters that no one will ever deliver. Because the recipient is not the one who receives the letter. The recipient is the one who is described within it. And they are still waiting, patient and silent, for someone to finally remember who they were. Some places do not allow themselves to be heard. The flume-covered bridge stands within Franconia Notch State Park in Lincoln, New Hampshire, spanning the Pemigewasset River at the base of a narrow granite gorge. Built in 1886, the bridge is one of the oldest in the White Mountains region and serves as the entrance to the Flume Gorge, a natural chasm carved by glacial meltwater over thousands of years. The walls of the gorge rise 70 feet on either side, draped with moss and fern, channeling visitors along a wooden boardwalk that winds through one of New Hampshire's most visited natural attractions. The park draws hundreds of thousands of tourists each year. They come for the waterfalls, the rock formations, the covered bridge that appears in every guidebook and travel brochure. They photograph the entrance, walk the boardwalk, and leave with memories of rushing water and towering stone. But those who pay attention notice something else. They notice how quiet it becomes inside the bridge. The first formal documentation of the acoustic anomaly came in 2008, when a team of environmental scientists from the University of New Hampshire conducted a baseline sound study of Franconia Notch as part of a broader project on noise pollution in state parks. The study involved placing calibrated microphones at various points throughout the park to measure ambient sound levels, traffic from the parkway, aircraft overhead, the natural sounds of water and wildlife. The flume-covered bridge was included as a control site. Enclosed wooden structures typically amplify sound, creating resonance effects that make footsteps and voices louder and more distinct. The researchers expected the bridge to register higher decibel levels than the surrounding forest. They were wrong. Dr. Marcus Henriksen, the project's lead acoustician, placed a microphone at the center of the bridge and began recording at 10:15 in the morning. A colleague, Dr. Priya Ramanathan, stood at the entrance and spoke in a normal conversational tone, reading a passage from the study protocol. The recording captured her voice clearly for the first 4 seconds. Then it began to fade, not gradually, but rapidly, as though someone were turning down a volume dial. By the 8th second, her voice was barely audible. By the 12th second, it was gone. Henriksen checked his equipment. The microphone was functioning normally. The recording levels were correct. He asked Ramanathan to repeat the test. The same thing happened. Over the following 2 hours, the team conducted 17 separate tests using different microphones, different positions, and different sound sources. They clapped, they shouted, they played recorded tones through a portable speaker. In every case, the sound diminished rapidly once inside the bridge, reaching near silence within 10 to 15 seconds. The effect was not uniform across the structure. At the entrances, sound behaved normally, but as the source moved toward the center, absorption increased exponentially. At the exact midpoint of the bridge, marked by a worn plank that generations of visitors had crossed without noticing, sound effectively ceased to propagate. Henriksen measured the ambient noise level at the center of the bridge at -4 decibels. This should not have been possible. The threshold of human hearing is approximately 0 decibels. A reading of -4 indicated that the bridge's interior was quieter than the quietest measurable environment, quieter than an anechoic chamber, quieter than the deepest cave, quieter than anywhere on Earth. Dr. Ramanathan, standing at the center during one test, reported a sensation she struggled to describe. "It wasn't just that I couldn't hear the outside," she said in a later interview. "I couldn't hear myself. I tried to hum, and I felt my throat vibrating, but the sound never reached my ears. I pressed my hand to my chest to feel my heartbeat. I could feel the pulse, but I couldn't hear it. It was like my body had gone mute." She remained at the center for approximately 90 seconds before the sensation became unbearable. She described a growing pressure in her ears, a sense of isolation that bordered on panic. When she stepped back toward the entrance, normal sound returned immediately. The team's findings were submitted to the New Hampshire Division of Parks and Recreation in a confidential report dated November 2008. The report recommended further investigation, but noted that the anomaly posed no apparent safety risk to visitors. No further investigation was conducted. But the park's tour guides had known about the silence for years. A seasonal employee named Jeffrey Arsenault, who worked at the Flume Gorge Visitor Center from 2001 to 2014, described the phenomenon in a 2016 interview with a regional podcast. "We learned pretty quick not to talk inside the bridge," he said. "You'd start giving your spiel, history of the bridge, how old the gorge is, whatever, and by the time you got to the middle, your voice would just kind of disappear. People would stare at you, waiting for you to finish, but they couldn't hear anything. Some of them thought you'd stop talking." Arsenault said the guides developed workarounds. They would deliver their information before entering the bridge or after exiting. Some carried small whiteboards and wrote key facts in marker, holding them up for visitors to read. "We never told anyone why," he said. "What would we say? The bridge eats sound? People would think we were crazy." When asked if he had any explanation for the phenomenon, Arsenault shook his head. "I asked a ranger about it once. Old guy, been there forever. He said the Abenaki had a name for that spot, something that meant the place that listens. I don't know if that's true, but it stuck with me." Historical records offer little clarity. The flume-covered bridge was constructed in 1886 to replace an earlier wooden footbridge that had been destroyed by flooding. The original bridge, built in 1871, is poorly documented. No photographs survive, and only a handful of written references exist. One of those references, in a letter from a surveyor named Horace Clement to his wife, describes the crossing in unusual terms. "The bridge at the Flume is a queer place," Clement wrote in August of 1873. "One feels quite alone there, even in company. I spoke to my assistant as we crossed, and he did not answer. I thought him rude until I realized he had not heard me at all. The silence within is most profound, more so than any church or library I have known." The letter does not explain the phenomenon, it merely observes it. In 2012, A documentary filmmaker named Elise Tremblay attempted to record ambient sound inside the flume-covered bridge for a project on New Hampshire's acoustic landscapes. She used professional equipment, a matched pair of condenser microphones, a high-resolution digital recorder, and sound-dampening windscreens designed to eliminate environmental interference. Her recordings captured nothing. Not silence in the sense of an absence of loud noise. True silence, the complete lack of detectable sound waves. The audio files showed flat waveforms, unbroken horizontal lines as though the microphones had been disconnected or placed in a vacuum. Tremblay tested the equipment before and after the recording session. It functioned perfectly outside the bridge. She did not include the footage in her documentary, but she kept the audio files and shared them with colleagues in the sound design community. None could explain the results. "I've recorded in anechoic chambers," one colleague wrote in response. "I've recorded in abandoned mine shafts and sealed basements. I've never seen anything like this. The file isn't corrupted. There's just nothing on it. The bridge didn't make silence. It made absence." The flume-covered bridge remains open to visitors today. Thousands walk through it each summer, crossing the worn planks on their way to the gorge beyond. Most notice nothing unusual. They chat with companions, take photographs, and continue on without pausing. But some, those who walk slowly, those who stop at the center, those who pay attention to what their ears are telling them, notice the change. The river outside grows faint. The footsteps of other visitors fade to nothing. Their own breathing becomes imperceptible, their own thoughts somehow louder in the void. And for a moment, standing in the middle of a bridge that should echo with the sounds of summer tourism, they experience something that should not exist. Perfect, absolute, unbroken silence. Not the silence of a quiet room, the silence of a place that has stopped listening. Or perhaps a place that is listening so intently that it has forgotten to let anything else be heard. Some games are played long after the players are gone. The Mechanic Street covered bridge crosses the Israel River in Lancaster, New Hampshire, a town of approximately 3,200 residents in Coos County. Built in 1862, the bridge is modest in scale, just over 92 feet long, and carries light traffic along a residential street that connects the town center to a neighborhood of older homes built in the decades following the Civil War. The Israel River runs shallow here, its waters moving slowly past banks lined with willow and alder, reflecting the lights of nearby houses on clear evenings. Lancaster is the county seat of Coos County, the northernmost and least populated county in New Hampshire. The winters are long, the summers brief, and the sense of isolation is palpable, even for those who have lived there for generations. The town has a quiet dignity to it, white church steeples, brick storefronts, covered bridges that have outlasted the industries they once served. The Mechanic Street Bridge is not a tourist destination. It serves a practical purpose, nothing more. Residents cross it without thinking. Children ride bicycles through its shadowed interior, and most people who live nearby have never given it a second thought, except on nights when the moon is new. The first formal report came in 1973. A woman named Dolores Kilpatrick, who lived in a house approximately 150 feet from the bridge's western entrance, contacted the Lancaster Police Department on the evening of September 11th to report a noise disturbance. She described hearing children playing inside the covered bridge at approximately 11:45 at night, laughing, jumping, the rhythmic thump of feet on wooden planks. Officer Raymond Soucy responded to the call. He found the bridge empty. No children. No evidence of recent activity. The floorboards were dusty and undisturbed. Kilpatrick insisted she had heard them clearly. Soucy noted her statement and closed the report as unfounded. 3 weeks later, on October 10th, she called again. The same sounds, children jumping, a pattern she described as like hopscotch, that 1-2-1 rhythm. The same time, close to midnight. The same result. The bridge was empty when Susie arrived. He noted in his report that October 10th was the night of a new moon. September 11th had been as well. Over the following years, similar reports accumulated. They came from different residents, some living near the bridge, others passing through on late-night walks or drives. The details varied slightly, but the core elements remained consistent. The sound of children playing, a rhythmic jumping pattern, laughter that seemed to echo from inside the bridge, and always on nights when the moon was absent from the sky. In 1981, a retired schoolteacher named Harriet Bergeron began keeping a log of the incidents. Bergeron had lived on Mechanic Street for over 40 years and had heard the sounds herself on multiple occasions. She was skeptical by nature, a woman of facts and records, and she wanted to understand what she was experiencing. Over the course of 5 years, she documented 23 separate incidents. She noted the date, time, weather conditions, and phase of the moon for each. The correlation was absolute. Every incident occurred on a night when the moon was new within 48 hours of the astronomical new moon as published in the Old Farmer's Almanac. She also documented something else. On the morning of November 6, 1983, the day after a new moon, Bergeron walked to the bridge at dawn to inspect the floorboards. She found chalk markings. The markings formed a grid of squares, approximately 8 feet long and 3 feet wide, drawn in white chalk near the center of the bridge. The pattern resembled hopscotch, but the configuration was wrong. Traditional hopscotch uses a linear arrangement of numbered squares, typically 8 or 10. This grid contained 12 squares arranged in a shape Bergeron did not recognize, a pattern that curved back on itself, with certain squares marked by symbols rather than numbers. She photographed the markings with a Polaroid camera. The images, preserved in her personal files, show the grid clearly: 12 squares, 3 symbols she could not identify, and faint smudges that might have been footprints. She returned to the bridge that afternoon. The markings were gone. The floorboards showed no evidence of cleaning. No chalk residue, no water stains. The grid had simply vanished, as though it had never existed. Bergeron repeated her observations over the following months. The pattern held. Chalk markings appeared on the mornings after new moon nights, always in the same location, always in the same configuration. By afternoon, they were gone. She shared her findings with a colleague at the Lancaster Historical Society, a man named Frederick Ouellet, who examined the photographs and researched the symbols. He found no match in any known hopscotch variant, children's game, or regional folk tradition. The symbols appear to be pictographic, he wrote in a letter to Bergeron dated March 1984. One resembles a hand, another might be a bird or a leaf. The third is unclear, possibly a house, possibly a gate. I cannot determine their meaning or origin. He noted one additional detail that troubled him. The grid is designed for 3 players, he wrote. The arrangement of squares suggests a rotation. Each player would move through the pattern in sequence, with the final square returning to the start. But traditional hopscotch is a solitary game. I do not know what game this is or who taught it to the children who play it. In 1997, a folklore researcher named Dr. Antonia Vasquez from the University of Vermont conducted a formal study of the Mechanic Street phenomenon. She interviewed 14 residents who had reported hearing the sounds, reviewed Bergeron's documentation — Bergeron had died in 1992 — and spent 3 consecutive new moon periods observing the bridge. On her second observation, she heard the sounds herself. It began at approximately 11:20 in the evening, she wrote in her field notes, a rhythmic thumping from inside the bridge. 1 beat, pause, 2 beats, 1 beat. The pattern repeated continuously for approximately 4 minutes. I also heard what sounded like children's voices, though I could not distinguish words. The tone was playful, not distressed. Vasquez approached the bridge with a flashlight. The sound stopped before she reached the entrance. Inside, she found fresh chalk markings, the same grid Bergeron had photographed 15 years earlier. She documented them with a digital camera and measured their dimensions. The grid was precisely 8 feet, 2 inches long, and 3 feet, 4 inches wide. The squares were evenly spaced. The symbols were identical to those in Bergeron's photographs. By morning, the markings had disappeared. Vasquez's study, published in a regional folklore journal in 2001, concluded that the phenomenon was consistent with residual haunting patterns observed at other sites, but she acknowledged that the term explained nothing. "We do not know who these children are," she wrote. "We do not know when they lived or when they died. We do not know what game they are playing or why they play it, only when the moon is dark. We know only that they continue and that the bridge remembers their movements, even if we cannot see them." Local historians have attempted to identify a tragedy that might explain the haunting. The Israel River has claimed lives over the centuries, drownings, accidents, the inevitable toll of living near moving water. But no record exists of children dying at or near the Mechanic Street Bridge. No cemetery in Lancaster contains graves that correspond to the phenomenon. The children, whoever they are, left no trace in the historical record, only in the chalk. A maintenance worker named Gilbert Fortin, who has serviced the bridge for the town since 2006, described his own experience in a 2018 interview. "I've seen the markings maybe a dozen times," he said. "Always the same spot, always the same pattern. I tried scrubbing them once with a wire brush and soap. Took me 20 minutes to get them off. Next new moon, they were back. Exactly the same." He paused, staring at his hands. "I don't scrub them anymore. Seems wrong somehow, like I'm erasing something that's supposed to be there." The Mechanic Street covered bridge remains in use today. Cars and pedestrians cross it without incident, day and night, in every phase of the moon. The floorboards are worn but solid. The timbers are dark with age. But on certain nights, 12 or 13 times a year when the sky is black and the stars seem closer than they should, residents near the bridge sometimes pause and listen. And if they listen carefully, they hear it. The 1-2-1 of jumping feet, the murmur of voices too faint to understand, the sound of children playing a game that no one remembers. A game with 12 squares, a game with 3 symbols, a game that begins and ends in the same place, and that has been played in the darkness of the new moon for longer than anyone can say. Some crossings are completed in ways we cannot follow. The Cresson-covered bridge spans the south branch of the Ashuelot River in Swansea, New Hampshire, a town of approximately 7,200 residents in Cheshire County. Built in 1859, the bridge is one of 4 covered bridges in Swansea, a town that calls itself the covered bridge capital of New Hampshire, and stretches just over 52 feet across water that runs slow and brown through a landscape of former mill towns and overgrown pastures. Swansea sits in the southwestern corner of the state, near the Massachusetts border. It was once a center of small industry, sawmills, grist mills, box factories. But the 20th century was not kind to places like this. The mills closed. The young people left. The covered bridges remained, monuments to a time when the roads they carried still led somewhere that mattered. The Cresson Bridge is the least visited of Swansea's 4. It lies on a back road between the villages of Swansea Center and West Swansea, carrying only local traffic, farmers mostly, and the occasional tourist who has taken a wrong turn. The structure is plain, functional, painted the traditional barn red. It has been repaired and restored multiple times over the decades, but its essential character remains unchanged. What happened there in 1927 has never been explained. The incident occurred on the evening of October 14th. A horse-drawn carriage departed from the Whitcomb farm in West Swansea at approximately 5:30 in the afternoon, bound for a social gathering in Swansea Centre. The driver was a hired man named Theodore Ballou, 41 years old, employed by the Whitcomb family for seasonal work. The passengers were Miriam Whitcomb, 53, the widow of a local merchant, and her niece, Clara Aldrich, 24, who was visiting from Keene. The weather was clear. The roads were dry. The distance was less than 3 miles. The journey should have taken no more than 40 minutes. The carriage never arrived. When Miriam and Clara failed to appear at the gathering, the host, a woman named Evangeline Porter, assumed they had changed their plans. It was not until the following morning, when a farmhand discovered the Whitcomb horse wandering loose near the Crescent Bridge, that anyone realized something was wrong. A search party was organized within hours. They found the carriage first. It was inside the bridge near the center, positioned at an angle that suggested neither arrival nor departure. The wheels had left clear tracks in the dust and grime that coated the floorboards, tracks that led from the western entrance, curved slightly toward the southern wall, and then stopped. The carriage itself was empty. The horse's harness had been unbuckled and removed. The reins lay coiled on the driver's bench as though placed there deliberately. Theodore Ballou was gone. Miriam Whitcomb was gone. Clara Aldrich was gone. The search party expanded their efforts to the riverbanks, the surrounding woods, the fields on either side of the road. They found no bodies, no signs of struggle, no indication of where 3 people and a horse might have gone. But they did find something else. On the eastern bank of the river, approximately 30 feet from the bridge's exit, a collection of personal belongings had been arranged on a flat stone near the water's edge. The items included Miriam Whitcomb's handbag containing her identification and a small amount of money. Clara Aldrich's shawl folded neatly into a square, Theodore Ballou's cap and work gloves placed side by side, and a pocket watch belonging to Miriam's late husband, which she was known to carry with her always. The items were dry. They showed no signs of having been dropped or discarded in haste. They had been arranged, deliberately, carefully, as though someone had taken the time to lay them out for display or for discovery. The search continued for 3 days. Volunteers dragged the river for a quarter mile in each direction. Dogs were brought in from Keene. A state police officer from Concord arrived to coordinate efforts. They found nothing. On October 18th, the search was called off. The Cheshire County Sheriff's Office classified the disappearances as unexplained and transferred the case to inactive status. No bodies were ever recovered. No suspects were ever identified. No explanation was ever offered. The carriage remained inside the bridge for 2 weeks before being removed by the Whitcomb family. The horse was never found. Local newspapers covered the incident briefly. The Keene Sentinel published a short article on October 16th, noting the disappearances and the ongoing search. A follow-up article on October 21st reported that the investigation had been suspended. Neither article offered theories or speculation, but among the residents of Swansea, theories circulated quietly for years. Some believed the 3 had staged their own disappearance, run off together, perhaps, to escape debts or scandal. But Theodore Ballou had no known connection to the Whitcomb family beyond his seasonal employment, and both Miriam and Clara were described by acquaintances as content with their lives. Others suggested foul play, a robbery gone wrong, bodies hidden in the woods or weighted and sunk in the river. But no motive was ever established, and the careful arrangement of belongings did not fit the pattern of a violent crime. A few spoke of older explanations, stories passed down from grandparents about the Ashuelot River, about places where the water ran deeper than it should, about crossings that led somewhere other than the opposite bank. These stories were not written down, they were not repeated to outsiders, but they persisted generation after generation in the silences between words. In 1952, a highway engineer named Donald Batchelder examined the Cresson Bridge as part of a statewide assessment of covered bridge conditions. His report, filed with the New Hampshire Department of Public Works, focused primarily on structural integrity, load capacity, timber condition, foundation stability. But in a handwritten addendum, Batchelder noted an anomaly he could not explain. The wheel tracks observed in the 1927 photographs remain partially visible on the floorboards, he wrote. Despite 25 years of traffic and weathering, faint impressions persist near the center of the bridge. The tracks curve toward the southern wall and terminate abruptly. They do not continue toward either exit. I cannot account for this. He recommended that the floorboards be replaced as part of routine maintenance. They were in 1954. The tracks were gone. But in 1971, a local historian named Genevieve Proul photographed the bridge's interior for a book on Cheshire County landmarks. One of her images, taken near the center of the bridge, shows faint parallel lines in the wood, lines that curve toward the southern wall and stop. The floorboards had been replaced 17 years earlier. Proul did not include the photograph in her book. She donated her negatives to the Swansea Historical Society upon her death in 1993. The image is catalogued as item number 1971-C F-08 and is available for viewing by appointment. A note attached to the file in Proulia's handwriting reads, "The tracks return. I do not know why. I do not want to know." In 2003, a paranormal investigation group from Massachusetts received permission from the town to conduct an overnight study at the Cresson Bridge. Their report, published on a now-defunct website, documented several anomalies: unexplained drops in temperature near the center of the bridge, brief electromagnetic fluctuations, and a single audio recording that appeared to capture the sound of wooden wheels rolling on planks. The recording lasted approximately 11 seconds. The sound began at the western entrance, grew louder as it approached the microphone, positioned at the center of the bridge, and then stopped abruptly. It did not continue toward the eastern exit. The team's lead investigator, a man named Christopher Dumont, described his interpretation in a video interview recorded on site. "Something happened here," he said, "something that left an impression, literally, in the wood itself. I don't know if it was a tragedy, a crime, or something else entirely. But whatever crossed this bridge in 1927 didn't reach the other side, not in any way we understand." He paused, glancing toward the bridge behind him. The tracks stop in the middle. The belongings were placed on the far bank. Somehow, something got across. But it wasn't the carriage, and it wasn't the people inside. The Cresson-covered bridge remains open to traffic today. Vehicles pass through without incident. Pedestrians walk its length and emerge safely on the other side. The floorboards have been replaced 3 more times since Batchelder's assessment. And yet, those who know the history sometimes hesitate before entering. They think about the carriage that rolled in and never rolled out. They think about the belongings arranged on the opposite bank, too neat, too careful, as though someone wanted them to be found. They think about Theodore Ballou and Miriam Whitcomb and Clara Aldrich, who climbed into a carriage on a clear October evening and crossed a bridge that was only 52 feet long. 52 feet. A journey of seconds. A distance that should have meant nothing. And yet somewhere in those 52 feet, between one bank and the other, between the entrance and the exit, between the world they knew and whatever lay beyond, they vanished. The tracks still appear sometimes, faint lines in the wood that curve and stop, facing neither direction, going nowhere, or perhaps going somewhere we cannot follow. And the river keeps moving beneath, carrying its secrets toward the sea, as it has since long before the bridge was built, as it will long after the bridge is gone.